In our church architecture, we have an interesting name for the space in which the congregation is gathered. It's called the nave, which comes from the Latin word navis, meaning ship. The term emerged originally in Roman architecture when the ship was the symbol of the church, the early church. And like Noah's Ark, the image of the church as a ship or a boat suggests a safe haven from the chaos of the outside world. And in the Hebrew culture, water was a symbol of chaos. And certainly, if you look up right now, the ceiling looks like we are in an upside-down boat. It's true. Have a look. The nave, this boat-like space, connects the narthex, which is the gathering space, to the sanctuary. In our worship each week, the liturgy moves from the narthex into the nave and then to the sanctuary, which houses the altar facing liturgical east to signify the rising sun. And then back out again. And so we just witnessed the liturgy beginning with the altar party processing in from the narthex, from west, or liturgical west at least, the outside world, through the nave and to the sanctuary, where we heard the word proclaimed. And then after the liturgy of the word, the altar party will move deeper into the sanctuary. And that is why every week, after the offertory sentence, Christine and I, or Elvira today, will move from these desks to the chairs behind the lectern and the pulpit, moving the liturgical action closer to the altar. And just as everything orients eastward as the liturgy begins, after we have all communed, we head back west from the sanctuary, through the nave, back into the narthex. But as we're gathered here in the nave, we are literally in the same boat together as disciples of Christ. And as we journey through the liturgy, before we will all disembark to coffee hour and beyond, to the really difficult and sometimes harrowing work of following Christ in a world that does not want him, but desperately needs him. Our gospel story today reflects this journey. After a long day of teaching, Jesus has his disciples go ahead of him to the other side of the sea by boat. Much later in the evening, after Jesus has spent some time praying alone, he sees the boat out in the distance being battered by the waves and the wind, far from any shore. Now keep in mind, the disciples were seasoned fishermen, and the Sea of Galilee, because of its location, was prone to sudden and violent storms. Jesus trusted the disciples to go on ahead of him, whatever weather may come. And so in this story, the storm is not some freak storm or some unique circumstance. This was just another day of life for the disciples. And it's part of our life as well. The feeling of being battered by waves of frustration or sadness, waves of struggling or suffering or addiction, waves of anxiety and grief, and that sometimes feeling of the winds being against us. And that can be so overwhelming. It can be difficult to recognize Jesus, present or approaching us amidst these storms of life. Now, to be fair to the disciples and ourselves, their nerves were shot. They had been battling the storm all night. They're nowhere near their destination. They are tired. They are frustrated. They are spent. And perhaps they are frustrated with themselves, that they cannot succeed against this storm despite being competent fishermen. So it makes sense that Jesus walking on the sea would have been unexpected and terrifying, in usual circumstances, certainly, but even worse, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm. And I know when I am feeling battered and worn down, when I have been battling storms and getting nowhere for so long that I'm losing heart and I'm afraid, I forget that Jesus is seeing me struggling from the mountaintop, and that Jesus chooses to walk toward me through the chaos, telling us, as he told the disciples, Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. I forget that Jesus is willing to join me in the boat, to still the winds, to save me from sinking further. And that is why we gather in liturgy together each week, to take heart, to commune with the presence of Christ, to remember that we are not alone and that we do not have to be afraid. Because these stormy conditions are part of life. And we are all in the same boat together, my friends. And in this boat, we may be battered by life, battered by the winds of dissension and confusion, illness, the chaos in our natural world, the chaos in our political climate, the chaos in our own personal lives. We may fear we cannot manage the winds on our own and that they are indeed against us. Or we may feel like Peter, having had the courage to be drawn out of the boat by Christ, only to sink because of the distracting winds. We bring all of this to our gathering space together, to our boat. And the good news is that Jesus is ready to save us the moment we ask for help. But we do have to ask. As we heard in Romans today, everyone who calls on the Lord will be saved, and we can trust that. As we learned from Peter, our eyes only need focused. Excuse me, this is so important, I'm messing it up. As we learned from Peter, our eyes need only be focused on Christ. Yet it's so hard to focus on Christ, and so easy to get caught up in the chaos around us. And that is why coming together to worship often as a community is so necessary, so we can encounter the living word, and we can maybe invite Jesus into our boat to quiet the winds for a moment, so we can reorient ourselves to focus on Jesus' presence and love for us, to prepare us to go back out into the world. Many years ago, I participated in a high-adventure team-building camp. I was in 8th grade, long time. And my 8th grade classmates and I had to accomplish tasks like getting a whole group of us over a 20-foot wall, or traveling across a muddy field using only 2x4s, that kind of thing. And the hardest task was called the wire. It was a 15-foot wire stretched between 2 trees about 3 feet off the ground, and each of us had to walk across it by ourselves. Much like Peter sinking into the water, I fell off that wire repeatedly. I just couldn't do it. Until one of my friends put up her hand in front of me and said, "Focus, Natalie, focus." And she kept her hand in front of me the whole way across. And by focusing on her hand and her voice, I was able to make it across the wire. Despite my fear, despite my distraction, despite my total lack of balance, or even the belief that I could do it. Focus. As we are gathered together today in the same boat, let us once again reorient our focus on Christ as we move through this liturgy. Christ who will walk through the chaos with us. Christ who will comfort us, calm the winds, save us when we cry out. And I wonder, how might we need Jesus to accompany us to the altar and back out to the narthex today? What words may we need to hear on this journey? In the Book of Common Prayer, there is a section for individual devotions for the daily office. Starts on page 136 for those of you who'd like to check it out. There's morning, noon, and evening prayer. And I pray noon prayer every single day. And I do it because of the reading for noonday prayer. And so I'm going to share that with you right now, because it very much resonates with our gospel. And it's one that I invite you to carry during the week. So it's from Isaiah 26, and it's on page 138. O God, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are fixed on you. For in returning and rest we shall be saved. In quietness and trust shall be our strength. O Jesus, bring us that perfect peace, even if just for this moment. Let our eyes and minds be fixed on you, focused on your voice and presence that will never leave us to battle the storms of life on our own. Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. Amen.